Good morning. I think if there's one thing that really stuck with me about all of yesterday was that across both of the panels and across all of the different sessions, there was this really beautiful choreography that sort of developed with each paper really feeding off previous sessions and things like that. It was a roller coaster at times in terms of the emotions and the investment, but it really just all flowed beautifully together. And I believe that's now about to flow into today, and in between all the three panels that we have. I know that my conceptualization of today changed radically overnight, as did many of the presenters who, sent updated versions of their presentations. And it's a sense of sort of flow, which has really dictated the way in which we as Haus der Kunst have actually thought about this entire event. It's been highly collaborative from the beginning, not just in terms of our ongoing collaboration with the Kulturreferats der Stadt München and freispiel Kulturagentur, but also internally in the discussions that we've had with both myself, Andrea Lassoni, Emma Enderby, but also the entire curatorial team. We've been talking about the forms that these discussions could take. We've been asking about artists and thinkers and makers who have either had a really strong influence already on the program of Haus der Kunst or that are within our thinking and within our thoughts. And what we've done is we've brought together today two panels interspersed on either end of the day that really sort of interrogate this idea of the monument and its relationship to cultures of memory and memorialization. And just to show, as an incredibly serendipitous example of this, when I was sort of thinking through the composition of these panels, I had a couple of sort of quotes that I would constantly go back to, a couple of ideas. One of which I discovered last week is the opening quote in Romy Crawford's book, Fleeting Monuments and the Wall of Respect. And it's a quote from Okwin Vezel, which I'd just like to read out because I think this is really it really demonstrates the ways in which some of these thinkings about the whole 2 days have come together. He's speaking about the archive. Yet, against the tendency of contemporary forms of amnesia, whereby archive becomes a site of lost origins and memory is dispossessed, it is also within the archive that acts of remembering and regeneration occur, where a sutura between the past and the present is performed, in the indeterminate zone between event and image, document and monument. And it's this last bit, the idea of a sutura between past and present, and I would posit also between the present and the future, in which we sort of locate these discussions about monuments. This idea, and it reminds me of the series of sutra paintings that the German artist Jörg Immendorf painted in the 1980s. These strange sort of amorphous shapes that were very tenuously held together by these stitches that almost looked like they were ready to explode. There's almost imperfection about the ways in which we try and encapsulate memory and how sort of this idea of monumentation speaks to us as a community, as people, as individuals. I think this is really the image that really sort of plays through within all of the papers that we see today. It's imperfect. It's in many cases it's temporary. It's only sort of holding things together. It's desperately trying to hold things together, and afterwards there'll always be a sort of sense of a scar. And with this in mind, the two panels that we've come today are really looking at monuments in terms of spaces and in terms of times. It's looking at them in terms of spaces, not just the spaces, of course, in which we normally encounter monuments, that is the space of the city, the physical spaces, but it's also looking at digital realms, it's looking at filmic realms, it's looking at sonic realms, and it's also challenging this idea that a monument is something that is stable, that is immutable, that stands in a particular spot and doesn't move. And stands in memorial. And this is really something that we hear again and again in these debates, generally about the statues, within this binary of should we tear it down or should we leave it up. This idea that a monument's meaning is, once it is up, it is there for all eternity and its meaning cannot be changed, its meaning cannot be challenged. So with the first panel today and the first three papers, we're really looking at these ideas of movement, environment, AR. The idea of monuments or the idea of cultures and memories that shift and change and adapt and move through spaces. And so it is my very great pleasure to present the first paper, So how it's going to work is we're going to invite everyone to come up and present their proposal, their paper. And then at the end, we're going to invite everyone back up here, and we're going to have a discussion first amongst ourselves, and then with you in the audience. And this is where we're really sort of, trying to really emphasize the forum nature of this. I should also add, in between the sessions today, we have a lunch in which everyone is invited, a catered lunch, and also a dinner where again, we can continue to exchange these ideas. So the first paper is from Marina Pugliese. Marina is an art historian and museum specialist. Internationally known as a scholar in the conservation of contemporary art, she led a consortium of diverse museums in Milan, having founded 2 of the 3 institutions, Museo del Novecento and MUDAC. In 1997 and 98, she was awarded the scholarship by the Accademia dei Lincei in Rome. In 1999, she was awarded an international scholarship at the University Paris I with the Università di Pavia. In 2013, she was a scholar at the Getty Conservation Institute, and in 2017 and 18, she co-curated with Barbara Ferriani and Vincente Tordoli the exhibition Lucio Fontana Ambienti, Environments, Hangar Bicocca in Milan. In 2018 and 19, she was creative director of the Future Humans Video Archive at the Berggruen Institute in Los Angeles. And since July 2020, she's head of public art in the city of Milan. And since 2022, she directs the department for the city of Milan, which includes MUDAC, the Museums of Cultures, Intercultural Relations and Public Art. And so it is my very great pleasure to welcome Marina Pugliese up here to present the first paper there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Damien. I'm a little bit embarrassed because Romy didn't have that introduction yesterday, and today I feel like I did a lot of stuff compared, so it's okay. Thank you so much, Damien. Thank you, Sabine. Thank you, Daniel Bürkner and Magnus for this marvelous invitation. What I'm willing to talk about, and I would love to be able to see my screen better, is about monumentality and the concept of untimely. The undertitle might be the bubbling monument. So as Damien said, I'm the head of public art for the city of Milan. And it's curious because Milan didn't have a public art sector till 2 years ago. So basically anything related to public art and monumentality was totally, left to basically spontaneity. There was no program, there was there was not like a timely and thoughtful approach to things. And at the same time, we have to think about monuments as objects which change and shift the relationship toward times and meaning, and as objects which also change and shift their meaning towards different communities. This is quite a good example. It's a monument by Maurizio Cattelan, which was installed 10 years ago. And it's in front of the Stock Exchange building in the very center of the city. And basically, he was giving the finger to the Stock Exchange. And it was a shock. So there was like a huge debate whether it was this, it was the case to install, this monument or not. Then it became like neutralized, like accepted. It lost his meaning. And then again, it became like re-symbolized through things. So this was in the period of the Me Too, and it was painted in pink, getting, of course, temporary. It was an action by another artist. So it changed again its meaning. And again, to talk about the fact that monuments are polysemic through history, this is another good example, is Bartholdi, the Lion of Belfort in Paris, which is like a monumental, huge monumental piece, which was celebrating the victory in the Franco-Prussian War, and then was replicated in a smaller version in a square in Paris. But during the May of 1968 was, used as basically a pedestal for students to do their demonstration. So it became invisible. It totally lost its capability of talking. So the specifics of monuments is that they can share values or they can get silent, or they can bubble and become problematic. So now, in 2022, it has been covered as a beer because now it, it talks about ecology. So it totally, shifted the meaning again. And then sometimes monuments can become offensive. And this is a funny picture I took in a warehouse of a museum in Vilnius, in Lithuania. And there was like a bunch of statues celebrating Lenin and Stalin, which were, of course, like recovered in the warehouse. But how about the relationship towards memory in what we are producing now? So we should also think about our contemporary production. So at first sight, let's think about where monuments are situated in the realm of cities. So since I arrived, so this is just a production of the last 2 years, you can see in blue it's monuments, and they are all in the city center. And in red and yellow, these are mural pieces, which are scattered around in the peripheral areas, okay? And so this is quite interesting because monuments are often linked, to the very heart of the city, which is not, where like people live, most people live, where most of the new communities are, where most of the dynamics of the new city and of productive societies are. So there's this, like dichotomy between the city center and the rest of the city. This again is an image of the city center of Milan, and it's a park art line which was made for gentrification. So basically, in order to be able to build this skyscrapers of very famous architects, the producer, the constructor, had to basically pay back financing a project of public art. And this project is already ongoing since 7 years. It has been conceived before I arrived. And again, it's monumental in its approach. Like many, not all of them, but many of the objects are monumental. I was quite struck by this piece. This we have just inaugurated by Alfredo Jar very recently. It's called the Red Pavilion, and it's kind of a manifesto against gentrification because it's a small building. You can enter in it, and it faces the skyscrapers you saw before. But you see them through this red glass. And it's meant to be a critique towards gentrification. But then, and he called it an anti-monument. But then if you think about it, it is a monument. It is permanent, it is site-specific, it is made of concrete. And so I thought, how weird. I mean, he talks about anti-monumentality, but at the same time, he's building a monument, right? Instead, there's another example which to me is beautiful, and I think this is a good example of anti-monumentality by Riccardo Benassi. It's called Daily Desiderio, and it's basically a screen next to a bench where every day there's a different message, and the artist every day sends a message. So my point is, through COVID, we learned that, of course, cities are participatory places more and more, and museums have to talk, outdoors and to extend their action outdoors. And public art is the place where probably the discussion has to take place and the relationship between people and art and communities and spaces. We organized an ICOM meeting focused on this. So what should we or could we do to celebrate the identities without celebrating the space and the center of the city and this, strict relationship with the place? So I began to ask to myself, is site specificity overrated? And is it possible to have transient forms of site specificity? So one of the projects we began together in this new program of public art was to promote the idea of painting murals which were related to the identity of each neighborhood. So the project is named One Mural for Every Neighborhood. And so basically, with the people of the place and choosing some artists, designers, or experts in calligraphy and so on, we were trying to build a mural which would welcome you. And it's an ongoing project. We have 88 neighborhoods in Milan. So we're just at the beginning of this project. But it's nice because, and also it's temporal, because with murals, as we learned yesterday with Romy, the temporality of murals, of course, is totally different than the one of objects. Then we've been asked in the very same place, so in proximity to the Artline Park that you saw before, we've been asked to connect that park to peripheral parts. And so we thought of doing basically a rambla of art, so like a walkable space which would connect that park to other parks, more outside in the outskirts of the city. And to celebrate our history in a form which might be replicable. So Milan is the city of Italian design, and the designers, of course, have thought of public space and have thought of public benches in public cities. So we thought of basically collecting a series of historic benches from the beginning of the century till contemporary times, and basically to spread them in this very long boulevard. So I hope we will realize this, within 2023, and basically produce something similar to an outdoor museum of designed benches. And then after this boulevard of benches, there's a small park, which is it's kind of left apart, and we answered to the request of the people living in the neighborhood, which said we would love, this park to be more lively and to be filled with interactive forms of art. And so we decided to produce with an artist who's called Patrick Tuttofuoco something similar. This is a project by Brian Jungen, which was made in Documenta in 2012. That was like a fun park for dogs. We are working more on a different idea, which is the idea of building an interspecies park. So basically a place where animals and humans of different ages can interact with objects designed by artists. Of course, it will take ages. So this is the plan, is the beginning. But the main idea is also that what we are going to produce is replicable. And so we will be possible to repeat these modules also in different parts of the cities or even in other cities. So I would finish my talk with a question, which is it possible to think about public art as a replicable and scalable module? So as something which somewhat thinks about site specificity in a totally different way and might be joined in different places at different times. Thank you.
What a perfect slide to leave it on as we transition over. The second paper I would like to introduce is by Dr. Sandra Beate Reimann. She is a curator at Museum Tongli in Basel, where she curated, amongst other exhibitions, Stephen Cripps' Performing Machines, Rebecca Horn, Body Fantasies, and most recently the thematic group show Territories of Waste, which runs until January next year. In research and publication, she focuses on sculpture and installation in the second half of the 20th century. And in particular, she worked in 2020, I believe, on the very much the moving monument Tongli Boat Ahoy, which she's going to use as a sort of basis of her discussion today. So thank you very much, Sandra.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. So I was invited to present the project Museum Tongli Ahoy, which happened last year in 2021. And as not everybody here might be familiar with Museum Tongli, I will get a very short introduction. So Museum Tanguy is an art museum in Basel, and it's dedicated to the Swiss artist Jean Tanguy. He lived from 1925 to 1991, and he is one of the best-known Swiss artists from the second half of the 20th century, and I will quickly show. It's very hard to quickly summarize his oeuvre, but I'll show 4 examples. So he was a kinetic sculptor. So he started his career with this is the same object seen from 2 different sides, with like sculptures that were with motors or other mechanical devices moving. And he built reliefs that were moving, kinetic reliefs. This one is called Meta Kandinsky, with this idea to not have a fixed composition, but have a million of options of compositions of paintings and abstract artworks, for example. In 1960, he did the first self-destructive artwork in the garden, in the sculpture garden of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where he built a sculpture, a kinetic sculpture that incorporated all sorts of things, fireworks, exploding balloons, stink bombs, burning piano, and so on. And this machine self-destructed itself during 17 minutes in the sculpture garden. And towards the end of his career, he created also very large-scale works. You might think monumental, but I would say more spectacular artworks. This was the scope, to have very spectacular artworks. This one, the Große Meta Maxi Maxi Utopia, was built in Switzerland for an exhibition that was shown in '87 at the Palazzo Grassi in Venice, and it's built in such a way that you can disassemble it and rebuild it and show it in different places. So that's like a super short introduction to the work of Jean Tanguy, where I left out many important aspects. So, Museum Tanguy was inaugurated 5 years after the death of Jean Tanguy, and it's entirely financed by F. Hoffmann La Roche AG. It's a monographic museum, and it's dedicated to his art. The special exhibitions that we do are focusing on either art that inspired him, artists of this time, but also contemporary art exhibitions and thematic exhibitions that deal with themes which were also subject to his art. So in 2021, we had the 25th anniversary of the museum, and to mark this 25th anniversary, the museum was traveling by ship to 12 cities. And I happened to be the head of the project management of this logistically absolute insane project. It was like in times of Corona, also Deutsche Bahn did several strikes during this time, so it was very, very challenging. So the aim of the cruise project was to nourish existing partnerships, initiate new ones, and also present, of course, Jean Tanguy and the mission of the museum to audiences in these cities. So basically, at its core, it was a networking and PR event, if you like. So I will present first the project with all its parts, and then follow with some hints how this might connect to the question of this conference. And hopefully we can then also elaborate this further in the joint discussion. So Museum Tanguy was traveling by ship from Paris via Amsterdam to Basel, sailing on canals and the River Rhine. And the cruise visited places that played an important role in Jean Tanguy's career and for the reception of his work. And it lasted around 10 weeks, from 17th of July to 26th of September last year. And the barge was dropping anchor for 2 days in each location. So after Paris, we went to Antwerp, and then to Maastricht, and then further on to Amsterdam, and then followed along the River Rhine through Germany back to Basel. So we stopped various locations in North Rhine-Westphalia, in Gelsenkirchen, in Duisburg, in Krefeld, and in Düsseldorf. We also stopped in Koblenz, and then in Frankfurt, in Mannheim, and then we were back in Basel. The ship hosted a documentary exhibition on Tangali's art and his artistic career. And the exhibition focused on his relation to each of these specific stops on the cruise. There was no artwork except one on the ship, and that was also due to conservation reasons, so there's no climate-controlled environment on such a barge. It was getting very hot and very humid at times, sometimes very cold. So the decision was made to have a documentary exhibition and also, of course, to connect the artistic biography of Jean Tinguely to each of the specific locations in this exhibition. I will show just a couple of examples. For example, Tinguely was part of the kinetic art exhibition Vision in Motion, Motion in Vision in Antwerp in 1957. Amsterdam was a very important city with the Stedelijk Museum for his career, where he was part of several group exhibitions, amongst one of those the exhibition Dialebei, where he was curator with other in a collaborative effort with other artists, and presented a room full of balloons. Then very important for his connection to Germany was the first involvement at the building of the Musiktheater in Gelsenkirchen, where he was invited by Yves Klein. So the Musiktheater was built by the architect Werner Runau. He invited Yves Klein to participate and create artworks, site-specific artworks in the architecture. And Yves Klein, a friend of Jean Tinguely, then brought also Jean Tinguely there. And there's still a kinetic relief in the building that's still functioning as well in the theater. Another stop was Düsseldorf, where in 1959 he supposedly was throwing out his manifesto for statics out of an airplane. It's still not quite sure what actually happened, but yeah. And just one other example, in Frankfurt, Tinguely was in an exhibition together with Luginbühl in the Städel in 1979. So these are just a few examples for the tour. On the barge, we also hosted an art education program, mainly targeting for school classes and local groups. It was partly organized prior, depending on also school holidays and school breaks. So we had school classes and local groups that came and did an art education project on the barge. We also had a performance program that I curated that traveled with us and was shown in all the locations in the partner institutions we had in each of the cities. So we commissioned 3 new performance pieces that played in each of the museum, art space, or theater. And they were rooted in different fields ranging from music to theater and dance. And they showcased an array of different performance approaches. And in this respect, also, their work recalled in a very, very loose way the many faceted performance practices of Jean Tinguely himself, as well as the blending of art and life. So we had a performance conceived by Nevin Aladin, the German artist, which was called Body Instruments and was performed by 2 dancers. And she continued her interest in instrumental interventions with this conceived performance with percussion instruments and accordions that were attached to the body, and as a result of the motion of the body would also produce musical sounds. So there are numerous references from Oskar Schlemmer to Rebecca Horn, but even also to music making in public. It stretches from wearing bells in medieval gestures and fairy tales, or in the fairy tale of the Ratcatcher, for example, and numerous customs of modern street music. This performance happened in public space, but also inside. What you can see here is now one of the performances in Paris outside, but also in the Forum of the Centre Pompidou in the start in Paris. Then we had performance by the Swiss, French, or Romans, I don't know how you say, from the French part of Switzerland, Marie-Caroline Ominal. And she conceived a solo that she danced herself on a circular surface that formed a stage. You could also say a ring, in which she slipped into a number of roles, one after another, performing with abstract forms, but also depictions of characters like a female figure, something between a witch or a Mexican La Catrina, and many more. And last but not least, the third performance was by Israeli artist Karen Sitter, and it was a theater piece with two actors, Damien Ribgetz and Fernanda Farah, and she picked up on the social alienation and banalities and horrors of everyday life. So, we had one actual artwork with us on this cruise, which was also the highlight. It's Tangli's sculpture Schwimmwasserplastik from 1980. It was mounted on the barge of the deck and is usually found outside of the museum. So it was originally conceived as a mobile water sculpture, but is today and now back again in front of the museum presented more like a fountain sculpture. It differs though a bit from Tangli also did a couple of fountain sculptures that are fixed like maybe I go for like the theater fountain in Basel, for example. So the Schwimmwasserplastik is actually more a mobile, conceived as a mobile water sculpture, which was done in 1980 for a sculpture exhibition in Reihe near Basel. And the historic pictures you see here is that the sculpture had one of the big problems. It wasn't actually swimming. So it was supposed to swim, but it was constructed that it didn't. It tipped over all the time. So in the end, it was fixed to the ground and is now also part of the collection of the museum. And it connects more to earlier sculptures of the 1960s, where the water was also used as an ephemeral kinetic element. So this was a very, very fast ride to this very large project. And I'm coming to my sum up or some loose remarks regarding past statements and present futures. I do have to say I was a little bit surprised by the invitation because the Museum Tangli Ahoy didn't have like an elaborated concept or new concept of monument representation or art in public space compared to what we have discussed before and yesterday. And of course, the museum represents a dead white male European artist. And also the project wasn't dealing with urgent or violent social questions and disruptions, but I'll come to that in a second. Tangli's art is of course very socially relevant. So normally the museum focuses more on the art of Jean Tinguely and not so much on his artistic biography as we did in this tour. There's also a shift that is visible in the name of the museum. It was when it was inaugurated, it was named Jean Tinguely Museum and has been renamed later to Museum Tinguely in order to make this shift from the concentration on his biography more towards his art and the themes and subjects of his art. So basically, I think in the context of the conference, it's mainly the form or the format rather than its content, which is interesting. One thing was the interaction with the visitors and the institutions in each of the places. In some of the cities, we experienced an enormous, and I really have to say almost scary, gratefulness from the visitors that we came and they had the chance to see this exhibition. We had also a program where we had planned talks with, in Antwerpen with Paul van Hooijdonk, who was at the exhibition in 1957, where they actually had a fist fight even. We had in Krefeld, the museum that we collaborated with, put up a collection display room for the works of Jean Tinguely and many more. In Gelsenkirchen, for example, we learned how the involvement of Jean Tinguely prompted a kinetic art collection, which is now hosted in the City Museum, City Art Museum, or for example in Frankfurt, that there was once planned at the Konstablerwache to build also a fountain. So there was also a lot of learning for us as a museum from the places. In Frankfurt, for example, the Kunstverein, the performances, despite all Corona and the rising wave of Corona, it was very well attended and we had a very, very fascinated audience. So I think in terms of format, it was a highly visible action, of course, but it remembered the artist and his connection to these cities. But of course, it wasn't a permanent program, it wasn't fixed. And it didn't drop in each of the cities like Tinguely dropped his manifesto from the sky, but connected to specific history and also to different degrees, was also to different degrees shaped by the institutions in each of the cities. So I'll do a very, very short switch to a different topic. I mentioned before that Tinguely's art has a very important social relevance, and that was his interest in consumer culture, in the throwaway society, and in growth in total. So especially from the 1960s on, there's a lot of work that he did to criticize the consumer and throwaway society. And we have currently an exhibition that was mentioned already before, which is called Territories of Waste, at the museum, with a lot of contemporary, but also art from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which deals with these questions. And because I think it's quite interesting also for this conference, I'd like to quickly present two artworks that are in this exhibition, which is, for example, Ottobong Nakanga, Tsumeb Fragments, and she develops a notion of monument and likes us to think about these holes in the earth that from which all the materials, the metals and the minerals came from to build our monuments here. In this case, in Tsumeb in Namibia, there was copper mined. So to mine these materials and metals to build our monuments here, that we have to think of these voids as well as monuments. Or another example is a Romanian duo, Anca Benera and Arnold Estefan, with this installation called The Last Particles. And here we have a connection to war memorials. They did research in Normandy in France at the Omaha beach, where on the 6th of June 1944 the Allies landed, and they examined and analyzed the sand there. And you can find magnetic sand, so sand that's made of metal particles that are magnetic and that still date are fragments of shrapnel and bombs from this territorial conflict there. And they also they used this magnetic characteristic of the sands to animate these particles and perform a monument. So this as a little excursus. And I would like to finish with the Manifesto for Static from Jean Tinguely from 1957. It's in German, so I will quickly just summarize in English. So he says basically, it's called Manifesto for Static, but it's he says everything is moving. So there's nothing that stands still. And we should stop to try to fight against this constant movement and constant change. And we should also stop to build cathedral and pyramids that will break down like candy. So I will read now his manifesto in German. Es bewegt sich alles. Stillstand gibt es nicht. Lasst euch nicht von den überlebten Zeitbegriffen beherrschen, fort mit den Stunden, Sekunden und Minuten. Hört auf, der Veränderlichkeit zu widerstehen. Seid in der Zeit, seid statisch mit der Bewegung. Für Statik im jetzt stattfindenden Jetzt. Widersteht den angstvollen Schwächeanfällen, Bewegtes anzuhalten, Augenblicke zu versteinern und Lebendiges zu töten. Gebt es auf, immer wieder Werte aufzustellen, die doch in sich zusammenfallen. Seid frei, lebt. Hört auf, die Zeit zu malen. Lasst es sein, Kathedralen und Pyramiden zu bauen, die zerbröckeln wie Zuckerwerk. Atmet tief, lebt im Jetzt, lebt auf und in der Zeit für eine schöne und absolute Wirklichkeit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sandra. That was, I've already got pages and pages of things I wish to discuss. I think it was really apt as well that, amongst the two images that we're finishing, it was very much embedded in the actual earth. And actually one of these red threads that are constantly coming through is this, this relationship from between the idea of the monument as this thing in the urban space, but also thinking about it in terms of its very, very practical, very real connection to the natural world, and of course our connection as well, and the sense of urgency that this brings up. So from the depths of the earth, we're now going to sort of launch ourselves into the digital realm. And I'd like to introduce Farhad Khalid and Mikala Hyldig. Farhad Khalid is a computer programmer who specializes in the development and design of web and mobile apps. His work focuses on utilizing augmented reality, image recognition, geolocation, IoT, mobile hardware, APIs, and other application libraries. He's built web services and software for various companies, including WebDown, acquired by Binder, as well as non-profit such as The Giving List. He's currently the owner of the independent development company Khalid, and is the main front-end developer for Seeker.io, a social app for connecting travel experts and enthusiasts. His artistic work focuses on the use of paper cutting techniques and the use of 3D sculptures, and his work in collaboration with Mikala Hyldig has been exhibited at the 12th Annual Berlin Biennial most recently. Mikala is an artist working in the field of new media and performance. She examines visual cultures through emerging technologies and body-based interventions. Her work embodies critical theory in immersive digital environments, examining processes of visuality and invisibility in relation to the politics of the body and structures of power in the field of the visual. Her work has been presented at the 12th Berlin Biennial, Martin Gropiusbau and HKW Berlin, Townhouse Gallery in Cairo, Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, the Nikolaus Kunsthalle in Copenhagen, Flux Factory New York, Azad Gallery Tehran, and discussed in Taz, The Guardian, and Monopole magazine. She is the editor of the research project Images of Transition on art and activism in the Arab uprisings, and is a founder and founding member of the feminist art collective Maternal Fantasies. Together with Farhad Khalid, she's created the augmented reality app Monuments AR that focuses on site-specific interventions in the digital space. It's my great pleasure to welcome Mikala and Farhad to the podium. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting us here. Also, thank you for accommodating that I can bring my kids. Otherwise, I couldn't have come. I'm really grateful and also in awe of being able to experience some of these essential processes of dealing with memory in static or moving forms, processes of rememorialization, reparation, and healing also. I was very, very touched at the program yesterday. And I appreciate very much that you've kind of framed these days as a forum. So not just for us to come and present what we have already done, but actually also to maybe become collaboration partners or give each other important input in processes that are ongoing. So we're going to take the leap and actually present or give you work that is completely unfinished. It might be finished in a couple of months. Right now, mainly the audio guide is working, so everything else is kind of up in the air. But I will give that to you as a gift at the end of this little talk. I want to show you a couple of works that Farhad and I have collaborated on during the past couple of years. The images that you can see here in the background are from Berlin Utopian Tours that took place in 2019, where we had this huge kind of social protest movement against gentrification called the Mietenwahn demos. So the demonstration against the insanity of rent increases that are causing so many people to lose their homes and pushing people out on the streets or onto the peripheries, so that a small group of people really can just make these huge profits without doing much more than speculating. So in a way, you can kind of maybe conceive of this as a social sculpture of which augmented reality is a part. It takes the form, or it kind of plays with the form of the guided tourist tour. So it's a tour through Berlin, more specifically, or mainly in Kreuzberg, going to places that have disappeared due to gentrification, or also places where activists were and in part are currently developing strategies to resist these processes of gentrification that are really eating up beautiful Freiräume. I still haven't found a good English translation for this, but like the places that are not striated, places that are dynamic and still free, where capital are not ruling, where instead community and processes of commonings are really present and are really, let's say, creating a very alive spaces. So what we did is then to each of these different locations in Berlin, we created also an augmented sculpture that in a way represents future development in art and the kind of emergence of a solidarity-based society. So each of these artworks are within the narrative of our tour created by different artist duos or artist collectives from faraway future, where we have chosen to create societies that are based on solidarity rather than profiteering. So it's also a very kind of hopeful series of artworks that take place or are situated in a very difficult context of gentrification. So I might just let it run a little bit, maybe the sound a bit higher, and I'll keep quiet for a little bit. So what you could also see was that we connected with different activist groups in the city and really used the city as a kind of a meeting place to bring the passengers of our buses together with artists, activists, and talk with each other, eat with each other, share research and ideas, and a lot of interesting collaborations arose out of this also. I also invited different other artists to create interventions along the route of our bus tour, among others Dorothea Nold, who created these big kind of signs for here we are constructing condos, call this number if you wish to make an investment. And actually people, you know, from China, as far away as from China, were calling desperately to, you know, place their orders. So there was a very good, it was a good kind of response to the project, which is really what we were hoping for also. So we got to be mentioned in the real newspapers, not the art newspapers, but like the newspapers that normal people read. And I was actually really glad about that, because, you know, it didn't kind of stay in this bubble of aesthetics that sometimes you can have the feeling, okay, are we just talking to ourselves? But it got out, which was really cool. If I push this? Oh yeah, okay, so this would basically just be some images from that project. I think you see the point if you're not familiar with AR. So you have the specific site you're at, and then you have a digital, in our case, 3-dimensional overlayering of that space, which is also kind of dynamically responding to your movements as a spectator or as a participant. And the kind of history of AR as a medium is very commercial. So far it's, you know, used to sell couches for IKEA, or in the case of, you know, Pokemon Go, you know, what was kind of disguised at this fun game was really also a way for big tech to guide people around to places where they would then buy stuff, you know. So that's the AR, you know, at the moment is really embedded in these kind of capitalist structures. And what we're trying to do with the best we can is to create a different space for that we both consider a very important new technology. Here you can kind of see the audience going around to the spots that were significant for our exploration or resistance, commenting on these gentrification processes. We are also had I think, a really good collaboration with Deutsche Wohnen and Eignen, which is like a big initiative in Berlin, really trying to say, okay, these big real estate players, we actually as a society, we need to look at the destruction that they are bringing to the majority of the population, and we need to consider or reconsider if we can actually allow this, and probably actually we can't. So it might be that we need to communalize the huge possessions of these companies. This was a little map of the tour, and this is a kind of this more of a installation that we created for the Futura Gallery that were hosting us also as a meeting point. I won't go too much into it because we have so much to show. So I will just go quickly here to the two projects, 2 AR installations that we created for the Berlin Biennial. And it's actually a collective artwork made together with students from Macromedia University, where I did a workshop for this particular project. One is situated at the former Stasi headquarters in Berlin-Lichtenberg. That's a state security during the GDR. And what we're trying to do is really to bridge this kind of done by people, ideologically motivated surveillance with what's going on right now in big tech, basically creating this embedment of us being constantly surveilled, also manipulated to make certain choices. Can look into Zuboff and others, surveillance capitalism being kind of the very present and very rapidly emerging danger that we need to face if we are not to become, let's say, a worst case scenario, puppets of big tech. So that is kind of the bridge that we're trying to create in this work. And then, oops, no, let me go one back. This is artwork. So this is like we built them in a 3D sculpturing programs. So this is just a screenshot from kind of the production. This work is created for the venue of the biennial, the Dekoloniale, which is situated in Berlin Mitte at the site of the former Reichskanzlei, so the chancellery, where it's now a completely nondescript space in the city, but actually this is where the so-called Africa or Berlin conference, also sometimes referred to as the Congo conference, took place, where Bismarck was the host, basically, of this conference of colonial powers to divide the African continent into zones of exploitations, the incredible suffering and also the repercussions of which we are still feeling today very intensely. So this was we were trying to kind of resituate the history of that space using AR and collaborating also with students with roots in Congo, where the rule of the Belgian Empire was particularly horrifying, and a huge genocide, which still hasn't been publicly recognized as such. So it's a very central and questions that we're trying to approach, yes, let me go. This is just like a space from where it is seen. This is a screenshot shot through a camera, so you can kind of see what the person who is at the decolonial venue is seeing, and you can also see other people looking at the piece. That the decolonial is like the kind of concrete building behind these shapes. Everything is moving. And there's an audio track, and I think we can actually share this with you also, but it is still, or the Dekoloniale venue asked if they could keep it beyond now the time scale of the biennial, which has come to an end, so you can also still see it on site. Yes, that was the Stasi, and this is the art which is entirely unfinished. And it is kind of trying to create an intervention in the context of Bismarck memorials nationwide. And we include migratory, intersectional, feminist voices, shape-shifting avatars, a space that is in movement and contesting what you see, contesting the solidity, in a way, of the Bismarck Memorial. And also very much as in Utopian Tours, it is presented as a kind of monuments from the future. So the artwork that you see is coming from a time a couple of 100 years from now. It is a time that we imagine that the basic goals of this conference have been implemented broadly. So it's quite of an informed, critical, inclusive future that we allow to speak through this artwork, while of course asserting a deep critique of the of that which now exists. It is something that you can. Farhad, these are printed in Istanbul, so we actually kind of had a big box, but that got lost in the mail, in German mail. So fortunately, we wanted to give all of you one, so now we can just give some of you one. Yes. So what you can do is you can so it's a sticker, so you can take it off, and then you can. Yeah, because I don't have any long nails. Well, anyways, you can attach it to a Bismarck monument of your choosing. Then you can download Monuments AR. You know, in all the usual channels, and then you can scan this sticker with the Monuments AR app, and then this other virtual reality will open up around you and to other people using the program. Right now, the only thing that's really working is the audio guide. So we're really taking a chance to share this with you as a project that's developing, and that we'd be really happy also to hear your thoughts on, and even take cues from you. What is missing? What would you like to add? This is something that we can do. It will probably change shape 10 times before it's finished, and will probably never be finished. So while I will give the word to Farhad, I will be giving these to you. And I also want to say, AR is such an interesting and also demanding field, because you need a lot of technical know-how, and you also need, I would say, a lot of critical awareness. And it's a field that's also only possible to explore in this collaboration between super technology savvy and artistic and discursively trained people. So the technology also, in a way, defines what is possible artistically. And this is why the collaboration between Farhad and I is very close. And also, this is why we've chosen to take time also to actually go into the details, or at least try to give an overview of what is actually going on the level of technology, because it's so interlinked. So this is Farhad. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikala. Yes, now on to the boring part of the presentation. When I talk about the technical stuff, I would like to thank Damien for finding us. I would like to thank everybody here for this really nice and very well organized forum. My name is Farhan. I will be talking to you about. Can you hear me? Oh, yes. I will be talking to you about the technical aspects of building this application, and how we made bringing these 3D sculptures into apps, how we made that possible. The name of our app is Monuments AR. I will be talking basically a little bit about what is AR and how it's been implemented within our app. And I will then move on to how we took this democratic approach to implementing AR. I'll get into the details of that. What are the challenges that we are facing right now? And what are the possibilities of where we can take this in the future? By the way, Mikala, the sculpture is there. It's just 100 meters too tall. It's supposed to be this little thing in front of you, but yeah, those are some of the challenges that we have to face building this out. At a very basic level, you need a point in space. You just need to start somewhere. What am I looking at? Where is the object going to be? Where am I standing? All of this is the basic starting point of the app. So you can use a sticker, this kind of a sticker, as a marker to say, this is the origin. This is where I'm going to start. This is where I'm going to put the sculpture. You can also say that the floor is where you can put your sculpture. The phone or your iPad or your Android phone can detect the floor, actually now using different kinds of lenses. It's only been really in the past 2 or 3 years that most people now have phones that support this kind of stuff. So now I do believe that it is possible to reach a much, much wider audience than we were able to before. So yeah, these are the 3 ways in which you can find the point of origin. You then, of course, have to work with the 3D sculpture. In this case, Mikala has built these sculptures, and she gives them to me, and then I have to figure out where they're placed and how they're placed in space. So far, we have only worked with markers that are physically present, so you just need a small sticker or a printout, and you just point at it from your phone, and then you can put the whole sculpture around you. And the sculpture can be really complex. It can be animated, it can have sounds, it can be spinning. There's a lot of stuff that we can do. This is interesting. This is a more recent thing that we have done. At first, we only used iOS because they provide technology that's kind of better, and more people have it. But then a lot of people don't have iPhones, and we don't want to push the agenda of Apple to sell more iPhones. It's don't want to do that. So what we did was we took a step back in terms of what was possible with augmented reality, and we brought in all the kinds of devices that are available. So now an app like Monuments AR is supported on Android and Apple. Yeah, so the first challenge we faced, of course, was that all these different phones some of them are fast, some of them are slow, some can't show our sculptures, all these different things. So then we came up, only during the last year, we came up with a way to make AR kind of democratic in that way. Everybody can see these sculptures fairly easily.
Okay, just one note to that, which I think was interesting, just in this discussion of how the technology affects also the artistic possibilities. So when we switched platforms to also include Android, what happened is that we lost 80% of the possibilities we had to animate stuff. So we basically went from being able to animate, all the objects in our environment to being able to just animate, put one movement on one object, and then if we wanted more movement, we need to section these different, to section them into different projects, and are then being loaded kind of simultaneously. I mean, it's the technical process that it was a big sacrifice in a way to get away from only using Apple phones.
It was worth it, though. I think it is. So here are some of the challenges that we face now. One of my goals in this presentation is to give all of you artists and people from different fields an idea of what is possible and what are our limitations, and maybe we can come up with interesting ways to implement these virtual sculptures for different purposes. So the current challenges are that because of the varying prices and the varying versions of the different phones, how fast or how big the sculptures can be and how complex the sculptures can be is very complicated. It's really difficult for me to figure out sometimes that, oh, okay, you have given me 200,000 vertices, and I have to render 200,000 vertices in a 60 frames per second camera movement. So all that makes it a real interesting challenge. If we were to make these, there's something called cross-platform programming, in which you just actually make only one code, and that can be deployed to both Android and iPhone. If we were to make those two things separate and do them independently, it will be really kind of time consuming. It could take months to come up with a basic version of the app. So we are trying to use cross-platform tools. Yeah, we are always in conflict in how we use the terminology, platform, and ecosystem and all that. It's like, not happy with how that turns out. So yeah, therefore we have to work with not all of the augmented reality capabilities that are out there. We can only work with a few. They're pretty practical though, I think. And then this is very interesting. People are not really familiar with this, but any app that needs to be made available on the iPhone and Android stores goes through like an approval process. That is, like there are actually people who are looking at, from Apple, who are looking at your app and they're like, okay, this conforms to all the guidelines. This process takes like several days, often. So yeah, there's this whole approval process we have to deal with, and they have like some really weird stuff like if your app has comments, then there should be, I mean, it's good. I think it's good. Then there should be a way for somebody to say this comment is inappropriate. So there are all these really complex guidelines we have to follow for their approval process. I'm going to talk about now what kind of possibilities there are in terms of research. This is not something we have done yet, but this is something that I'm researching at the moment. The biggest thing is that instead of using a printed marker to open a sculpture around you, what if we are able to place a sculpture in anywhere in the world using the coordinate system? We know latitudes and longitudes of anywhere, and they're fairly accurate within a few meters. So if I had the location of this room, I could put a sculpture right in the middle of this room. So that is something that I'm very interested in, and I'm trying to do some research on that. Of course, if you try to do this, then we have to keep into account the accuracy of location and how big the sculpture can be, and what is a meter for you in terms of meter for me in pixels, and so on. And of course, as you're like looking, it can like jump around because your satellite is telling you a location that's like not really accurate. Here's what that would look like. I mean, we're basically saying that, okay, on that latitude and longitude, how does it map to the X and Z? Because Z is in front of you and X is this way. How does that map to the X and Z coordinate system in the app? So hopefully this year or in the beginning of next year, once I'm able to solve this problem, we might be able to position objects that we don't actually need to go to. We can put them anywhere. We can say, okay, there's some kind of there's a museum somewhere, I don't know, we can put like a sculpture there. It's not physically present. So yeah. There's one other thing that I didn't put in the presentation, but I would like to say as well that since in talking with the people here, 360 video is something that people are interested in doing, and it's a very good way of presenting an environment, and it's very accurate. So I will also, I think with the help of Mikala, we will be looking into the possibility of using portals with 360 videos. What that means is that you have this phone, and in the screen, you see this circle, and then you walk through the circle, and then you're in the environment of the 360 video. And the 360 video is like you can look anywhere, and it's like accurate. So, so yeah, we're thinking of doing that as well. Of course, that requires a lot of work in the deep, dark rooms of the computer programmer. So yes, but I hope that this gives you an idea of what is possible. Please. Yes.
I try to understand if it will work for our remembering. Unsere Erinnerung. Is our mind now dependent on space and time? Can we catch a memory without space? Lost in time?
I don't understand, but in a good way. I think what you're asking is a very interesting question, but I'm like, I have to think about that a little bit.
Sorry, I'm too fast. So I will wait.
No, you know what?
I just tried to follow.
No, you know what? Here's my next slide.
Wow, talk about perfect timing. I just have to say as well, beginning that final presentation, Mikala, Farhad, with horrendous rent prices and problematic Bismarck sculptures, you're in the right place in Munich. There was a lot of nodding heads. We understand. Thank you to everyone for some incredible sort of insights and really different perspectives. And so, yeah, now I just really want to open up the discussion. And first and foremost, it was just something that was occurring to me right from the very beginning, Marina's talk, and she showed the work by Alfredo Jahr and, referred to it as this anti-monument. And said, well, actually, it's not really an anti-monument, is it? I mean, it's this great big architectural form that's located in a public space that sort of, is meant to sort of induce memory. And I'm thinking that, as we've been going on and we've been challenging these ideas about, as Sandra said, the ideas that forms are constantly changing, our thinking about form. My question is really, I think that actually one of the major issues that we have is our language is not appropriate to talk about these forms, these moments of trying to sort of engender remembering. And much like sculpture in particular from the second half of the 20th century on to today has continually again and again been subjected to reformulations in how we spoke about it. Rosalind Krauss speaks about the expanded field. Lucio Fontana, of course, speaks about environments as opposed to architectures and things. Maybe, in fact, that we actually need to begin to think about language and think about the way we talk about these forms. So I would like to start actually with Marina about this.
Well, if you remember, I began talking about monuments as bubbling forms of art in which they are not able to talk any longer, but it is difficult to find the language. One thing Mikala said, it's a minor thing, but she said we were published in the real magazines, not in the art magazines. And it's subtle, but it's huge, because the problem with the world of art is that it speaks to itself mainly, while public art is for everyone and has to be for everyone. And this dichotomy, it's also a historic dichotomy, because murals, for instance, have been traditionally used by underrepresented communities to express themselves because they had no means to do monuments. And if you remember my slide, the monuments are mostly in the center of the cities, while we have to think about, the city overall and peripheries. So yes, it's a problem of language, it's a problem of relationship with people. And one thing I was struck, then I will give the mic, is that probably two of the most interesting, in my view, projects that we heard are not coming from public art institutions, but are coming, one from an art historian teaching, Rami, teaching in a college, and another by Sandra, working in a museum. So they were able to find, the way of talking to people in a different way, while, as head of a public art institution or program, I feel I'm stuck.
Well, such a big question, and I think I can't really answer. But maybe one point that's important, which is important about Jean Tinguely's art, is that he always, coming from the Nouveau Realist in this time, that he always, and neo-avant-garde, if you want to follow that term, really thinking about art equals life, and this connection of art with the real life. And opening up, that's one thing, is also opening up the art institutions, having very low barriers for people to access art museums and engage with audiences. It makes also the the museum again a public space. But yeah, it's not about language.
Mikala, Farhad, are we talking about these interventions in space? Are we talking about them wrong? Do we need to actually develop a new way to talk about these sort of things that are, you know, these intervention, we'll call it interventions in both physical and digital space that attempt to engender these sort of moments of memory? Or
I think the question, or this inquiry into language is always incredibly important, and I think that the projects and the strands of thoughts that we saw and experienced yesterday, for me, that was a very rich adding to the vocabulary of the monument, and being in that this social situation and process of exchange, it expanded the possibilities for me to into a much richer understanding of how we can think, understand, move towards annähern the monument, because as it is now, yes, it kind of is something set in stone, right? And already now can be, you know, a brief gathering of bodies in a specific space at a specific time that will leave traces, and we kind of know this, but to elaborate on this together, yeah, I think that the kind of language we need, it's maybe not just a spoken language, you know, it's also something that we can situate in our bodies, our the exchange of energy between us. So it's like an expanded shift of language that needs to happen, if that makes any sense. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I like that. I like that question. It's something that I think about a lot, because I have to work with people who are from different cultures and who work with different languages. So yes, I like that. And coming from so far away, and suddenly being surrounded by all these different kinds of sculptures and monuments that don't have a language, it's like suddenly I understand stuff. You know, I don't have to like worry about you know, I don't initially have to worry about like what is the history of it from the point of view of the culture that I'm in. Just I can, at the very least, I can admire the visual artistic style of the sculpture. So yeah, I think that I absolutely agree. It's just like a great way to like filter that out. You know, there's no Urdu, there's no Turkish, there's no German. It's just there, and it represents something, and there's meaning. And at the same time, now that we are dealing with apps which are accessible to everybody in the world, we are entering a new realm in which, you know, there are like an infinite number of languages. So I would really like to see how that turns out. You know, how do people respond coming from different cultures, you know, who can look at the same sculptures that we have been working with? How do they respond? How do they interact with them? And what their thoughts are. I think it's very interesting to see how that will turn out.
I think the word that kept coming up again and again when I was listening to all of your presentations and even here is actually issues of accessibility as well. And I think this is why it was really vital to hear your paper at the end as well, Farhad. You know, we tend to have these wonderfully utopian ideas when it comes to new technologies, new industries and things like that. But, you know, on a very practical level, and we need practical people to say, well, actually, that's great, but, you know, not everyone has the latest iPhone. Not everyone has the fastest internet connection in the world. And this argument of accessibility is, of course, something that works in geographic space as well, which Marina just said. You know, a lot of these monuments located in the centres of cities, or in a lot of places that were hitherto deemed or still are inaccessible to a lot of people. And this occurs, at the level of geographic space. It occurs obviously within the sort of technological space. And of course, it obviously works within a sort of a linguistic or a social space. One of the big motivations for, museums to work on public art or monuments is this idea that by placing it outside of the museum, more people are able to access it. Those who don't feel like they can, for whatever reason, walk into a museum. But this brings, of course, its own issues, and this is why I found the mural project you were talking about in particular very, very interesting. I'd like, if you could you speak a bit more about this, and sort of in terms of trying to make these sorts of sites more accessible?
Yeah, I mean, I wish they were even more accessible than they are actually. I was very moved yesterday when we heard about the Wall of Respect being activated through poetry, readings, and music. So my wish for the murals we're doing for Milan would be that it's not, it would go beyond the mural itself. So the whole idea came from the fact that the city of Milan was working on the identity of the different neighborhoods, which of course are lived by different communities, each one, with their specific history and their specific mix of ethnicity. And so the idea came of having like small landmarks which would celebrate the diversity of all the neighborhood by, on the one hand, studying the history and the colors and the architecture of the place. So we collaborated with a university in which the students helped us to collect elements for the very specific place, which could be taken into consideration in the drawing of the mural. And at the same time, when possible, it's not always possible, working with the community living there. So I wouldn't say it's a success, it's a beginning. We can do better, we can do more, and the hope, as I said, would be that we could activate this mural and make them more lively. That would be, this shift between one language and another. So from, murals to performance to music. So this idea of ongoing and a different form of temporality, which is what Sandra, you did too, with the boat and moving into places and activating different activities. This is, I think it's great, yeah.
I guess the most important is that there's people, that something is happening, it can be a performance, it can be some, it could be also a children's art program, but the most important thing is that it's not just a material that's somewhere, but that it actually, whatever you do, it brings people together so they can talk,
I mean, what I really like about the Tongli boat in particular is, it really took this idea of, bringing this object, this constantly shifting, changing, evolving object to these different sites, and, and having things that would actually happen in the public space. It sort of goes against the idea that, which one hears, for example, again and again in the debates about the Elgin marbles in, the British Museum, and this idea of, well, people can just come to London, Greeks can come to London to see the Elgin marbles, presupposing that people have, the financial means and the time-based means to just jump on a plane and go over, and see what was, essentially a public site. This is almost the inverse of that. It's like, well, what we're going to do is we're actually going to take, Tongli, and we're not just going to take the artworks. We're going to take all these different sort of, we're going to take performative elements. And we're just going to sort of take it all on this sort of tour and make it sort of accessible. We're not just going to, put it in one of the museums there and sort of have a special exhibition that costs 25 euros to visit or whatever. This is what I found really interesting about this project.
And that was also something we were extremely surprised about, is how in some of the cities in Germany, like in Gelsenkirchen or in Duisburg, how really grateful the people were that we came to this town, and how such a low self-consciousness of the of the citizens of this, like they were really like that something like this comes to Gelsenkirchen and anchors there. They were so happy about it, and there were so many visitors, and was in a way also very shocking for me that there's apparently such a lack of art and culture, that they were so happy that they came and could visit. Or I remember in Duisburg that there were really a lot of homeless people also coming and visit the boat, and some of them being also artists, and asking, okay, is it free, and can I ask my friends? I know a couple of people that would like to still visit the boat, and I was very very touching and shocking, and also, of course, very important that like artists and curators and museums are doing this work, that there's really this need for art as well, and that's sometimes maybe you can forget when you are in a very rich city where there's lots of possibilities to see and participate with art.
Mikala, Farhad, could you speak just a bit more to this idea of sort of accessibility in terms of the works, not just in terms of actually its form, which was, you could argue, I mean, much more, possibly accessible in terms of, the way in which we're all beginning to sort of work with these sort of augmented realities, but also, overcoming these sorts of issues.
Yes, that's definitely something like so important to what we're trying to do. In fact, the fact that our app is available for almost everybody is like, the main goal that we have worked with. The first couple of versions were like, they were so limited in terms of ability. We didn't have like very many devices that could support this. So, the slide in which I talked about with the democratic implementation is really all about accessibility. We had to take a step back to say, okay, let us have more and more people access our work, instead of like just this few at certain venues in certain parts of the world. Let's just have everybody be able to access this content, because it's beautiful and it's meaningful. The markers that are on the website, you can just get them. So yeah, I think that accessibility is like, for me personally, it's definitely a driving force. A lot of the AR research that I've done in the past has to do with like, okay, what is supported and what is not, and what is common in the devices that everybody has.
So ideally, and I think we're already moving towards that point, people basically from everywhere can download these or activate these artworks everywhere. So some of them are site-specific or have a site specificity to them. Not all are unlimited, available all the time, but some are. The project that I hope also we'll be working on next, you will basically just need a Google logo to activate a whole other narrative. Again, of course, reflecting on the super important, or the necessity for criticality, a common broad criticality to arise around the question of how big tech are more and more shaping our life towards their own, to meet their own commercial goals. So that will be something that should be commonly available everywhere to everyone who can summon a Google logo to wherever they are, which shouldn't be difficult. But I also just on another note, what we were thinking about also in the beginning when we started working, whoa, we're doing this kind of activist or critical work, and it's only available on these super expensive iPhones. That's kind of self-contradictory. And then the reason to move on this way would be, well, if we wait with developing our works further until there's a platform that's available to everyone, it will be almost solely commercial interests that are shaping this entire AR space in the image, of course, of their own interests that are commercial, that are not critical, that are not inclusive, unless to create a surface where that will suit their interests. So we kind of need to work with what we have and kind of develop as we go, and not be afraid to show things that are imperfect or not finished, because there's a huge industry working to determine what that space of augmented reality means. And we need to, and other people need to shape it, I think, in a radically different direction. Accessibility is always in our minds, but we also need to react fast. So it's, yeah, that's
One of the things that really struck me about yesterday's sessions was this almost urgent need to continually think outside of our very specific frames when, dismissing the idea of a monument as it's traditionally understood. That, there are certain spaces in cities and things, and there are certain events and there are certain things that absolutely need to be memorialized, need to be remembered, particularly because otherwise they stand to be forgotten. But at the same time, there was this thing that continually also kept coming up again and again, and I think was mentioned during Romi's session, the idea that these sort of traditional spaces and forms of monuments, as we understand, are becoming increasingly spaces of either trauma or increasingly contested spaces. Tearing things down, leaving things up, altering sorts of things. And so my question to you really is, the projects and the ideas that you've put forward, the scalable, transferable monument, Marina, the sort of the movable sort of public, sort of both the sort of the AI things. Is this a possibility of where the idea of the democratic, of dare I say it, the utopian sort of lies, as opposed to the more sort of traditional sort of sites? Do you see that sort of being embedded within these possibilities?
It's a complex question. When I talk about the site specificity being overrated, of course, I was not referring to trauma and the need of memorializing traumatic moments, which is, it's there, it's crucial, it's a huge topic, and I don't want to dismiss that at all. I was more talking about, the other forms of public art, which are not referred, to traumas and are everywhere and occupy space. And one topic which struck me yesterday was by Colleen Smith. She talked about natural monuments. And I do believe that probably because art, of course, has historically been referred to nature, probably when humankind began thinking about monuments in art, the real reference were mountains, were, forests, were icebergs. But as we heard in Tangeli Manifesto, time, is always shifting and shapes are changing. So, of course, we have to take into consideration the need for memorializing, but also the shift in meaning in the future. And it's a very, very difficult task that we have. I don't have one answer. Of course, I do believe again that activation of places. I mean, we have seen it also in during the turmoil which followed the death, the killing of. Help me, I'm bad with names, and I have like memory. In the U.S., those two African American persons who were killed one after the other. George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Okay, I'm sorry for that. we have seen that monuments have been, not only toppled, but also reinterpreted. We saw it in Charlottesville, and so with people doing performances and giving different meaning, strong meaning, and trying to change, the semantic of the monument itself. So I do believe that reactivation is probably one of the strongest forms.
What I'm saying is totally nothing new, but that, and it's been discussed a lot, is that we always have to keep in mind that just putting something in public space doesn't mean accessibility, but that there's a lot of other like knowledge, ability to read forms. If we think about the historic monuments that have been shown yesterday, to actually even see that they deal, for example, about the Turkish wars, you need a certain amount of information or education, or at least accessible information at the sites. And that was also, I guess, what we haven't really talked that much about in the conference yet. I mean, especially in Germany, there was this shift after 45, that there was not so many monuments being erected, but basically a lot of so-called art in public space, supposedly neutral artworks that are of course not neutral, and need equally amount of knowledge to work as something that creates an actual public space.
I think something that I thought about yesterday in the talk with Samat Leila and what is her name?
Gisela Coleman.
Yes, that was thinking about the monument not just as this one thing that is put somewhere, but at all these actions and activities and decisions that take place around it, and that define and frame, or also delimit a space in which collective memory can take place. And I thought it particularly touching and also just relevant when they talked about how, in part, the municipality was kind of obstructing how they could create a space for commemorating, with just not putting enough chairs, or just not offering any sanitation or space enough, or just all of this, and like framed like this, then all of these little decisions that are being done by people at different positions in the municipality, they participate in the monument. And if we can like push that notion of participation, so that it actually is on an institutional level being internalized, I think it's a very powerful and important step. And then also we get closer to an idea of the monument that is much closer to how I like to think about art. So not as the, stroke of genius of one, typically male white artist who invented this thing, but like as a kind of participatory collective process of thoughts connecting and actions summoning up into something tangible, or also not tangible, but as a place that we can meet for collective memory to take place.
For me, this question is like kind of unexpected, and I haven't thought about this kind of stuff at all, because because I'm not working with places in the same way that the artists are. I'm working with places as just like a point in space, so I'm like, even when I look at the Monument of Independence of in Pakistan, in Lahore, now I'm suddenly struck by this, it does have a significance in terms of where it's placed. and somehow I didn't think about it before. So yeah, that's a good question. I don't have an answer for it because this is so new to me, but I think this is very significant.
But I think that's actually interesting also in terms of like how we work and how that shapes our concept of space. Because when Farhad is placing the sculptures that I created, he's looking at a dark screen with numbers on it.
Yes,
so
and it's in my like bedroom,
living room, yes.
on top of the bed somewhere. So yeah, I don't have a concept of that until just this moment. Now I have to think about it.
Maybe then perhaps what we're sort of hearing at the moment is, this idea of, as you said, Marina, what about, the memorial that's scalable, that's transferable, that's sort of adaptable, be it, sort of the wall of remembrance, which is, constantly sort of being, or was for a fixed period of time, constantly being sort of added on, and changeable, or, something that's sort of scalable in terms of the sort of the digital possibilities, or indeed sort of adapted performatively. I mean, this could possibly actually be the way to merge this idea of the sort of the democratic, the participatory, the inclusive with the idea of the site-specific. The idea that it actually could be something, it's, again, you're completely right. We cannot just completely dismiss the idea of site altogether because, yep.
I just want to add one thing that we just talked about yesterday. The technical word for that is skybox. So in like computer games and in like all these things, there's something that is in the background. There's a big sky, and it's all enclosed in a skybox. So we were thinking of the possibility of putting a sculpture in our own place with our own background and within our own skybox. So we don't even just bring the sculpture in, we actually also bring the environment that it was in as well. So yeah, that's really, I think that's really cool.
I would like to ask a question, also concerning your... But because like the good thing about these bad monuments is that they're still there and that they talk about the past and then we can react to them now. And the question I always have with like digital technologies, like coming from even with digital publications and so on, how do they last? How we can access it in the future, and how could we, like in 30 years, for example, react to your monuments? Your AR monuments, and that's always like, I guess that's also something you ask yourself in a very tricky question.
I would like to answer that. I was afraid of that question. In reality, because of the introduction of cloud computing, it's a fancy word for somebody else's computer. You put your stuff on somebody else's computer, which is somewhere else. So yes, this technology is changing like a lot, and it's really fast, and we don't know where the data is. I cannot physically tell you where it is, but what is interesting is that different governments are dealing with this issue in different ways. For example, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in Turkey, a couple of years ago, they passed a regulation that made sure that private information from companies of Turkey must stay within Turkey. And therefore, PayPal had to quit, because PayPal was like, no, we want all this stuff to be in the US and wherever we want. So Turkey was like, no. So it's, at the moment, we have the data which is in digital form. It's not very big. We have the data on our servers. We keep it for ourselves. But in reality, it is just regulated by like layers and layers and layers of things that most people do not know about. You're asking about 30 years. I can't even tell you what will happen next year. All I can tell you is that I'll have a USB somewhere that has the sculptures, and yeah, I think for me it's exciting to see what will happen. And this is the beauty of it also, that it's nothing is constant. We're seeing the same thing evolve over time. So yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. But for now, everything is available. That's all I can say.
And also just from a slightly different angle, but also a response to what you were saying. It echoes what, well, I was lucky to have a little chat with Sam and Layla yesterday before they went, and his lovely cousin, actually, who also brought a kid. So he was also saying, well, you know, it's a good thing that these monuments are still there, because otherwise we would kind of erase the problematic history that they represent. In Denmark, the discourse is also kind of raging at the moment. I mean, I live in Berlin since 20 years, but I know it still because my mom is still in Denmark. And before we created the Bismarck monument, she actually said, you know, we can't just tear everything down, then nothing is left. What should we do? We just have this empty space. And with the critical point for Samad and you also, well, if we tear it down, we can also erase the history and the necessary potential in critiquing it, because it will then be invisible. And that was where I think also that there's a potential in the augmented reality, which let that which is there still exist, but discuss it from a different angle, or contest it, or expand it, or I think that's where there's a lot of possibility in a way for like a kind of multi-perspective dialogue. You know, maybe other people would start doing also what we're doing, and there will be, you know, layers of augmented sculptures kind of fusing almost and creating this, you know, incredibly dense visualization of discourse and memory, in a sense, in these spots where now, you know, problematic figures are ranging.
I was more thinking even one step further, how would one comment then on these digital forms of memories? Like, for example, thinking about a scholar writing about hacking, for example, as a practice of questioning digital forms of monuments, for example. And of course the question of how to preserve and in the end how do we preserve your monument today? I guess the best and most secure thing is to publish a book with images and text describing what you did still.
We are up for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can talk to you in detail afterwards about how data can be protected and how these sculptures can be protected. We can maybe talk about it in more detail later. Yeah, I've given this a lot of thought as well.
I would really like to open it up to the audience, because I could see, oh, look at, here we go. There's a person over there who'd like to, yes?
Hello. Thank you for the panel. It's really interesting. I have a thought about the erasure of memory, which is the project of late capitalist neoliberal thought. I think they don't want things to be remembered because it's problematic for them to push their agenda. So there's this concept of fail fast, don't reflect. So I think public art in that sense is a beautiful thing, because you are placing things in intersections where everybody, you know, no matter their agenda, they have access to this piece, which may raise questions. So I have two questions actually. One is, what sort of resistance have you faced from the public for your pieces? Like, all of you are in very different dimensions of engaging with the public. So what kind of resistance did you face? Like, for example, in case of Marina, with this middle finger piece, what sort of even response? Was there any response from this boards? And the second question is more utopian maybe, and maybe basic. It's on accessibility. If we flip the question, there are people who have access but refuse to access it. And this goes back to the neoliberal sort of, oh, it's just too much to think about. Like, I don't want to think about all these questions. So is there a way to make people access these things that they don't want to think about? Thank you.
Okay, the first is easier, and whatever you do, whatever, In the realm of public art, there's always somebody who is against it. So, of course, the finger, you can imagine, the first person to be against it was the mayor. So even before, when Catalan basically, you know, gave his availability to donate his project, there was this meeting with the mayor, and the mayor was a woman at the time. She was like, she couldn't even, you know, speak about it openly. He wants to put a finger in front of the stock exchange. But whatever you do, like even if you do a mural or you know, let's say something completely abstract, okay, which shouldn't touch any sensibility, there's someone who interjects, okay? And this you have to take into account, of course. I mean, being into the public realm, there's not much you can do. The second question was about accessibility and how to make those who don't want to access instead to face, you know, the meaning. And this is more problematic and probably has to do also with, you know, the explanation we give to artworks. We should talk more, we should explain more. So probably we should do more, you know, like panels with entries, with details, also about the history. If you think about like every public place is full of roads with names which refer to historic facts, historic heroes, places, which refer to a multi-layered history, which can be offensive to someone, celebrating somebody else. So probably we should, you know, the problem is history. The problem is the relationship we have with history. So it is huge. It goes back to, you know, education. And it comes to the specifics of the use of the public space. So the thing is, I think, problematize more and talk more and explain more.
I want to know if anyone objected to the Tongli vote.
Yeah, well, the objection is, I guess, more subtle. Is basically people not coming. I guess it's not such a. But I guess the most. And then there's of course these things where maybe people don't really where you don't see it, where people don't really engage with the art, or you don't communicate enough, or you don't explain enough, so that they are not actually having the engagement with art, which we should also not forget. And yeah, of course, I mean, all these examples where art in public space, it has been a big discussion, big uproar in cities. These are all examples for where people were confronted with questions and information that they did not want to be confronted with. I mean, if you think about Dresden and this upside down autobus or other artworks more in the past, like think of Richard Serra and the tilted arc controversy in the 80s in New York City. So there's ways of placing public art in public space that you have to deal with it.
I think this is an area where AR really shines because is there anybody who works for Apple here? Okay, as long as there isn't. In the long app guidelines, in the really, really long pages and pages of guidelines, there is like no guideline about what kind of artwork you can present within an AR space. So we really have, as far as I know, we don't really have a problem in what kind of content we can give to people. So I think this is really great. And going back to your point about accessibility, it's just like everybody can access it for free. And that's just great. I think personally, this is just like a really good way, you know, to go in this digital direction, if you can.
So my question now, I don't know, are we talking about art now or monuments? Because art is, of course, free. And completely, you can do everything you want everywhere. But monuments are something different. I thought we were talking about monuments. And this is something which reminds people to things they want to forget. You know, no one in Germany, in Munich, wants to be reminded always, all the time, what their grandparents have done. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, this is something different. This is I'm not talking about art. I'm talking about monuments, and this is the responsibility. This is something different. And when I have to look for your monument, you know, then I know about you. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, will we not forget you? What when no one will look at your monument? This is my question. Because I have to come to you and I have to know you first. And about the thing I'm talking about or I'm thinking about, I have to search it. But the other thing, which in Italy, you know, this where the artist is writing every day something, that's fabulous. This is what we are in here and now, because there's a place you have to go walk through, and then you see it one day, and you realize maybe in the other day there's something different on it, like Simpsons. This girl, the yellow girl, is writing every day, I think, something on this blackboard, different thing. You know what I'm talking about? I'm not talking about art. I'm talking about the monument.
Can I say something?
Oh, please.
But it also depends on the generation, because probably what they do is speaking to younger generations who are much more technological than we are. Of course, they are broaching everybody, but of course, the level of technology that I have compared to the level of technology my children have or next generation is completely different. So I think we don't have to, I perfectly understand what you mean, and I appreciate also the differentiation between, you know, monuments and art, because not always monuments are art, okay? Mostly not, okay? Sometimes yes. But about the language, let's not forget that there's a different approach to materiality and ephemerality related to different generations. So I am totally, you know, welcoming and embracing also the use of new technologies, because, I mean, you know, times are changing and shifting, so we should be able to speak multi-layered to different people and different generations. This is the challenge.
Sorry, do you want to? Okay. Even within the generation, there are problems that people face that other people don't face. For example, as a Pakistani living in Turkey, there is no possibility of me to apply for a Spanish visa. I have to go back to Pakistan. And this like not, so I cannot come to see the monuments there. Yeah. I started the process for coming to Germany in February. And I finally got my visa at the end of the year. So we don't always have the ability to access monuments. But yes, I also understand your question about art versus monument. I can't say anything specific to that, because to me, they overlap, kind of. Art can be itself and not a monument, and a monument can be itself without art. But also a monument can be art. Yeah, that's what I would like to add.
I think arts and monuments kind of coincide. It can just be good art or bad art. Because of the aesthetic form that a monument takes, you are almost always within the field or the sphere of art. And I think you're totally right. Like, what we're doing is so difficult. It's so like difficult in the sense of a lot of people not even like being aware or understanding, okay, you actually need to kind of download the thing and scan this image, and it's like a huge process to teach people how to access these works sometimes, which for us is super simple. But I also think in that sense, we are also creating for a public that will happen in the future, and where it will be where art will, we will have a more expanded understanding of what can an artistic work and what can a monument be. And of course it can be something that's virtual, I think we are participating in a movement that will create such an understanding. But you're right, it's not there yet, and our works are definitely not, secured for the future. And all times, it's very ephemeral, and we were talking also with the biennial. Could you please have someone on site to, with a smart device, just showing people how this works? And actually, that wasn't possible at the time. So I think, but stuff like that, there needs to be that kind of that mediator of communicating how to actually activate the experience. Best case scenarios. There are like intermediate people there helping to get the process started. Even so, it's a good critical point of critique.
We have time for 2 more questions. I know there's one over here.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for the panel. I'm wondering about that role of monuments, that it tells us or reminds us of the past, but also about the future of those projects we've now learned more about. So if we have a ship that sailed through different cities and now it's gone, and we have an AR artwork that at some point will probably not be accessible anymore because sort of the technology changes. What will stay at site, and do you think it is even necessary that something stays at site, or that people can access it still, sense it still?
I think that's also a really beautiful question, because I would also tend to say no, it does not have to be permanent. It can be part of a process that lasts for a certain time, and then it changes into something else. But then, in order to maybe link the 2 positions from you, well, that would be a situation where then the archive again becomes important, because an archiving of these different interventions that have been at the sites as a publication or as another kind of archival, act of remembrance, that could then be a place where you can kind of go back and access all these different, let's say, steps of the way or transformations around the sites. That could be a super interesting, curatorial project.
Yeah, it's the same question to all the kind of performative monuments and things, and it touches maybe also some theoretical texts that have been written on the question, is there a distinguishing line between documents and monuments? And for me personally, I still think the only way to preserve, to be sure that things will be preserved somehow, is in some way to have a physical object in the end. If it is, even with archived images, you don't really know how they last. So in the end, like I said before,
like books?
Doing a book or have some sort of printed material document is I think the most sure way. And have it in some library, put an ISBN code on it and have it in libraries, and then it will stay for a certain time.
I am totally against monumentality, but sometimes you have to build, I wouldn't say monuments, but memorials, when you have to heal some memories. And for instance, the only monumental piece I am hoping I could promote and maybe be able to commit and produce while I'm in Milan doing this job is a memorial to Yekatit 12, which is a slaughter which was made by the Italians in Ethiopia in 1937. 30,000 people were killed. And Italians have a huge problem with their colonial past. We don't have that many signs in the city, so we don't have monuments, which are problematic, at least in Milan. In Milan, we don't. But we never tried to heal and to talk about this past. So now I'm trying, to promote the idea of building a memorial, which is a monument to a collective history, which is a different thing than a monument.
Go Sai.
Yeah, I'm the last person, so I'm asking two questions. And it's both to you, Marina. So the first question is, you made this really very nice presentation with Alfredo Jarre, Maurizio Catalan, and Brian Young, and I noticed these are really very famous artists, and they're well established. Alfredo Jarre had here also a very beautiful exhibition. And I was just wondering, when I was looking at these names and the figures, how the city of Milan and the process in which you are dealing with the moments of structural racism that comes on every level of a city. So I remember that sometimes the jury who are invited to decide what kind of public art is shown are also established people, mostly not really very sensitive to topics about racism, perhaps also because they haven't experienced it. And there's another example, sometimes it's only one person with a specific background who's in the jury, but it's so clear this one voice can't really change things in the process of choosing. So this is the one question: how do you deal with structural racism so that you make sure there's not more this kind of art? And the second question is, I think you already answered it, but still I want to mention it. So there's the one thing with the colonial history of Italy, but there's also the fascist history of Italy. So I was remembering when I was in Milan, the headquarters of the Air Force is a fascist building. Then I think at the Piazza Ciano was this attack on 1969, and it continued in Italy. And I mean, this is really, and it happens on a piazza. And perhaps you already answered him saying like these are topics, this has to be, you have to deal with it, but perhaps for that you have another answer, especially with the background of like, or with the knowledge of how like fascism returns in certain countries, unfortunately also in Italy.
Yeah, the second one is huge. Okay, we would have to have a panel about it. So I'm afraid I'm not able to answer shortly. But let's go back to the first. The first thing I did when I was given this, appointed this position, COVID was hitting. So I was lucky enough to be able to study a lot. And what I did is I compared the policies and the best practice of different cities in Europe and in the US and in Italy to see how were the process of involving stakeholders and people from different communities. And I'm referring to the West because, of course, we have to deal with our own history and to be able, to basically face what we have done. And so we are actually working on rewriting the policy on monumentality for the city of Milan. We have already done it towards murals. For instance, it might be stupid or irrelevant, but with murals, we decided that the municipality, which means the collectivity of the people living in a neighborhood, are part of the decisive process. And with monumentality is more complex, of course, because it has a lot to do with politics. And, we just had the elections, so it's going to be more and more difficult, of course. But we're in the process, at least, of analyzing the best practice. And the idea is to involve people representing different communities in the decision-making process. Very, very briefly, towards fascist history, history, that is super complicated because the fascist regime in its first part, not in the last one, actually was dealing with the best artists and the best architects. So we have monumental pieces which are works of art as well. And this is a problem, and I say it as an art historian, because besides, you know, the meaning, the value and the message, of course you have also to think about, you know, art history as an important value. So you cannot, you know, in a way, the process of toppling monuments is easier in many parts of the United States, for instance, where the quality of the statues were recent, and the quality was like, basically they were copycats, they were, you know, cast, repeated all over. We don't have the same history, so we have to face problems. This, yes, with site specificity to the place where you talk about and each history in each place. I hope I answered.
I think we've got the theme for our next conference. Just before I hand over to Magnus, I would just like once again to thank Marina, Sandra, Mikala, Farhad for a really fascinating couple of hours of discussion, which will continue into the lunch break. Thank you so much.